In a story with more questions than answers, we have a new twist in the case of a reported near drowning of a family at this massive Texas mansion. This police lieutenant is now reportedly suspended because of contact he had with the father while he was in jail. Now, that dad is not facing charges related to the alleged near drowning, but he is a central figure in this story who has been barred from seeing his kids as they recover from whatever happened on their property. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. What happened at that multi-million-dollar mansion in a rural part of Texas more than a week ago? We still don't know so many days later. And why did a police lieutenant with the Liberty, Texas Police Department, an agency not investigating this case, visit Domingo Quintana in the county jail? That's the newest question in this mystery. I'll tell you more about what we know about that in just a moment, but let's break down what we know about the man who seems to be at the center of this case, even though he's not facing charges at the time of this recording related to the near drowning that he said happened at his home in Liberty County, which is about an hour away from Houston. His name is Domingo Quintana. This is his mugshot from when he was arrested on misdemeanor animal cruelty charges the same day he called 911 with a shocking cry for help.
And you're going to have 4 kids, hospital on NyQuil, multiple bottles on scene.
Now, that is the radio chatter between law enforcement and first responders per Broadcastify when they responded to the more than $3 million mansion after Quintana, according to KHOU TV, told dispatchers that his wife tried to drown his 3 kids in a pond on their property after giving them NyQuil infused with vodka. Now, deputies say when they arrived, they found Quintana by the pond. He was wet. He had taken his children out of the water, they say. The ages, 6, 11, and 15 years old. Deputies say that Quintana's wife, who's 39, was still in the pond, and deputies needed to get her out. She was airlifted along with the 11-year-old to a hospital in Houston. The other 2 children were rushed to a hospital as well. Now, her name is Jessica Quintana, the mom. She was upgraded from critical condition to good condition, and according to KHOU, she's now breathing on her own. The 3 children are also in good condition, and they're now in the care of Texas CPS, though it's unclear whether they've been released from the hospital as of yet. I'm going to get more into the interesting development related to the custody of these kids in just a moment. But certainly a big development there was Domingo Quintana, again, not facing charges related to this alleged near drowning. He has been barred from seeing those children, and the children's mom has been allowed to have supervised visitation with the kids. But before we talk more about the custody part of it, we have to talk about this new development involving this police lieutenant from the Liberty Police Department. His name is Ramiro Lozano, and let's talk about how he gets involved in this story. This is a picture of him being sworn in as a lieutenant in March with Liberty Police Department on their Facebook page. Now, hours after Quintana's wife and kids were rushed to the hospital more than a week ago after this alleged attempted drowning that Quintana said that he witnessed, Quintana ended up in handcuffs, but it wasn't in connection to what allegedly happened at the pond. He was booked on a misdemeanor animal cruelty charge. Law enforcement said that they found an emaciated cat on the property, locked in a shed without food or water. Local media reported there were other animals on the property in alleged bad condition. Quintana spent a night in jail, and he bonded out on $5,000 after a court hearing. Now, this is video per KHOU of the scene outside the jail as Quintana left. He covered his face, and he wouldn't answer questions from reporters. Now, here's an angle of it per The Vindicator, which is a local newspaper in Liberty County, showing Quintana getting into a car outside of jail and driving off. According to KHOU, the driver of that car was Lieutenant Ramiro Lozano of the Liberty Police Department. Not only that, KHOU says that Lozano visited Quintana while he was in jail before he bonded out. And the TV station says that Lozano went to the county jail, he asked to speak with Quintana, and he got in. It's unclear who let him speak with Quintana, and it's also unclear what the two talked about. Now again, I keep saying it because it is important to say, that Domingo Quintana is not facing charges related to the alleged attempted drowning at his house. But this is not a case that is being investigated by the Liberty Police Department. It was initially investigated by the Liberty County Sheriff's Office. That's a different agency. And now it has been passed on to the Texas Rangers. It's unclear what Domingo Quintana's relationship is with this police lieutenant. And again, it's unclear what they talked about when they were in jail. Now, the lieutenant has been suspended pending an internal investigation per KHOU. Now, it's unclear who is going to face charges, if any, related to this case of this alleged near drowning that happened at the property more than a week ago. We do know that Quintana, though, will not be able to see his kids for the time being. This is video of Domingo Quintana per CW 39 in Houston as he was in court. He has not answered any questions since his name's come to light. That video you see there, that was before a court hearing on Friday last week. The judge did not let cameras in the courtroom, and per ABC 13 in Houston, during that hearing, an attorney for the children told the court that when CPS asked the children about their mom's well-being, the children reacted negatively when they were asked about their dad, Domingo Quintana, and whether they wanted to see him. The judge granted the mom, Jessica Quintana, 1 hour visitation with the children, but Domingo Quintana is barred from seeing the kids. The report also says that the court is looking for a mental health care facility for the 15 and 11-year-olds. Those are the two oldest kids of the Quintana children. Before we get back to this episode of On the Case, I need to take a moment and talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm with more than 1,000 attorneys, and they win a lot. They've recovered over $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That's 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. Even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start a claim. You can do it with 8 clicks on your phone. So if you've been hurt and you need to start a claim, go to www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan this QR code on your screen or click the link below. Another big mystery in this case is the question of who Domingo Quintana is. Right out of the gate, deputies said that they were told that Quintana sold cars for a living, but they were public in saying they weren't able to prove that. Now, we have found that this family, it does appear that they've had some legal issues in recent years. This is a judgment from January of this year after Quintana was sued in 2023 in Harris County, that's where Houston is, in the category of debt, contract fraud, misrepresentation. Now, we don't have the documents laying out the exact case against him, but the court ruled in the favor of the plaintiff, and according to this document, Quintana was on the hook for more than $138,000. Now, we also found an active case in Liberty County where Quintana is being accused of not paying taxes for years on a 72-acre property. The suit claims he owes more than $43,000. Now, as for the mom, Jessica Quintana, who's still recovering in the hospital, it appears, according to records in Houston, that she's the owner of a property and she is being accused of being more than $18,000 behind on taxes. This is per the Harris County Tax Collector's website. It is unclear if any of these civil issues, these financial issues, have any impact on what happened at the home involving the alleged near drowning of those kids. But one more thing on this home, because we know that this family, according to law enforcement, moved into this massive mansion in 2017. They reportedly bought the land, then built this more than $3 million house on top of the land. And it has a massive gate outside called the Rancho Monte Carmelo. And inside that gate, across the property, there are so many questions about what is truly a mystery that is still unfolding more than a week later. Joining us now is retired detective and law enforcement instructor Matt Irvine. Thank you for being with us on Law and Crime. This story has a lot of twists, a lot of turns. It's definitely a mystery. What do you make of apparently a lieutenant with the police department not investigating this case, seeming to have some sort of connection to the dad, who isn't facing charges related to what allegedly happened at his home, but still he's kind of the central figure of a very public story?
Well, thank you for having me on, Chris. And yes, the lieutenant having contact with the dad seems on its face very suspicious. I mean, there's obviously no reason he couldn't have had a relationship with this fellow before the fact. It sounds like this is a relatively small community, so the fact that he knows the guy is not in itself suspicious. But the fact that he would communicate with him while he was in custody and then allegedly drive him home upon his release seems quite suspicious. And I guess maybe the best way to understand this is to look at what a non-suspicious, appropriate contact might look like between somebody who works for the county sheriff and somebody who's in their custody. And any appropriate contact, anything that was more than just sort of incidental, would have to be cleared and approved by the case agent, by the lead investigator. It should be monitored, both for the integrity of the investigation and to avoid any accusations, and just for officer safety. And it should be recorded. And if this communication while the individual was in custody was not cleared, was not monitored, was not recorded, that would be very unusual and very suspicious.
Even as an investigator, if you had a suspect, and he's not, I mean, there's so much attention on this man, Domingo Quintana, but he's not facing charges related to this alleged near drowning that happened at his home. But if an investigator wants to talk to a suspect or someone who is in custody, when you arrive at the jail, what type of, because it seems like from what's been reported is this lieutenant shows up and he says, I need to go talk to this person, and then they allow him through. What typically in a county jail are the protocols that you would have to go through once you actually arrive at the jail to then be allowed to talk to somebody?
Well, there's the protocols, and then there's kind of what should be done for the integrity of the investigation. It's usually not that hard, just logistically, to get to speak to somebody in custody. You've got to provide identification, you've got to have a legitimate reason for the contact, and you've got to have the inmate be willing to talk to you. But if you meet those criteria, typically most jails will allow an official, a law enforcement person or an attorney, to contact the person in custody without asking a whole lot of other questions. That said, given that it's not his case, given that what I'm hearing from you, it's not even his jurisdiction, he absolutely should not be having contact with somebody in custody without clearing it through the agency of jurisdiction and the person whose case it is. And you're right, the gentleman's only in custody on a misdemeanor animal cruelty charge, but my understanding is he was taken into custody immediately after the discovery of his wife and 3 of his children in critical condition in a pond beside their house. So even if he's not named as a suspect in that case, he is clearly connected to that. He is clearly part of that investigation in some way. And so there shouldn't be any contact between anybody and this individual without that being made known to and approved by the person in charge of that investigation. And all the steps that are taken should absolutely be with an eye to maintaining the integrity of that investigation, including, as I said, having that contact monitored and having it recorded.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it was recorded. I haven't seen anything of that as of yet. But if he was just going to the jail as a visitor, I mean, typically speaking, aren't those conversations when you visit an inmate? I haven't done it myself personally, but something where those are all recorded conversations?
That really depends on the facility and where in the facility the conversation has taken place. I don't know if in a relatively small county, I guess this is a county of about 90-something thousand people in Texas, I don't know what their facilities are like and what their recording capacities are like. It's true that most custodial facilities have interview rooms that have recording capability, but I wouldn't say for sure that every visiting area of a custodial facility is necessarily recording the visits that are taking place there.
The Texas Rangers, before we get to looking at this story as a whole, and it's just been, and even law enforcement called it on the day that it happened, bizarre and breathtaking, which are pretty strong words to publicly put out to the media. But now that it's been handed over to the Texas Rangers, just as somebody who works in law enforcement, for people who don't live in Texas, how would you characterize that agency and the way they go about investigations?
Well, the Texas Rangers really are the elite investigative entity within the state of Texas. They handle many of the major and high-profile cases. They've been around for a long time. They've got a very storied and sort of legendary history. But given all the weird twists and turns and complexities of this case, and given at least the appearance of some impropriety or conflict of interest on the local level, it makes absolute sense that this case be taken over by an entity that is outside of that community and has a reputation that's above reproach.
I know at this point the wife of Domingo Quintana, she's been identified as Jessica Quintana. She is in good condition in the hospital. What she says will be very interesting in terms of how this investigation goes forward. I know the 3 kids, they are all expected to survive as well. But going back to the day and what we know about the call that was put out to law enforcement, Domingo, the dad, apparently calls 911, and he tells this story from what's been reported that Jessica, the mom, had drugged the 3 kids with NyQuil and then was trying to drown the kids in the pond. Now, there's no surveillance video on the property beyond certainly what she will say whenever law enforcement gets to speak with her and the kids. What are some of the other pieces of evidence that you would be looking for on scene as you're piecing together a story that doesn't seem to have any video evidence of what happened?
Well, as you said, the statements of Jessica and the 3 children are going to be critical. It's going to be interesting to see what they're able to say about the circumstances that led to apparently all 4 of them nearly drowning in this pond. It certainly would not be a first for somebody to commit a murder, or in this case, potentially 4 attempted murders, and then call 911 themselves. That's certainly been known to happen. It's the way in which some offenders will essentially stage a crime scene via 911. At the same time, there are also certainly cases of mothers taking their children's lives and specifically even drowning their children. The Susan Smith case some years ago being the most famous example of that. In this case, besides the statements of the involved persons, you'd certainly want to look at prior history at the location. Were there calls related to domestic violence, child abuse, other kinds of conflicts within the family? Who did these folks confide in, and what did they say ahead of time about any dangers they were facing or thoughts they were having? These kinds of incidents don't typically materialize out of thin air. There's usually behavior leading up to it that, particularly in hindsight, predicts the tragedies that happen. And so their close friends and people in whom they confide are going to be critical witnesses in this case. And this might be a case where things like internet search history become important. According to the 911 call, these children were apparently given NyQuil and maybe other intoxicants. I'd like to see what internet search histories look like in terms of ways to methods that might be used to take somebody's life in this way.
One thing I think on the just not being in law enforcement that probably the public takes for granted is just the expectation that police or a sheriff's office just like that will figure out exactly who this person is, their background. I mean, on the day, it was noteworthy on the day of the news conference, which was just a couple hours after all this apparently happened, that the spokesperson had said, apparently Domingo Quintana sells cars. We weren't able to confirm that, which is always kind of interesting when they almost, not that he's facing charges or a suspect, but just kind of raising questions about who this person is. How long does it typically take to, as a detective, kind of piece together who's someone who may not be a very public person? How long does it take? What does the work look like to try and figure out who they are?
Well, that's a great question, and it's the easy answer is it depends. But in this case, it sounds like he's known to the community. It sounds like he apparently knows the police lieutenant in that community. Sure. So I imagine that there's a lot of other folks in this small community that know this fellow and know his history and know the family. So it doesn't sound like these are people that are transient, who are living particularly off the grid or sort of marginalized lifestyles. So I would expect that in a small community like this, that these are people who are well known, who have strong community ties, and people who in whom they will have confided I don't think it's going to take that long to build a profile of Mr. Quintana or the family members, but figuring out what all this tells us is a much more complicated picture.
Going back to the police lieutenant, and just for people who don't know the ranking system, when someone's a lieutenant in the police department, how high up are they in the chain of command?
So it varies depending on the size of the department, but typically a lieutenant is a lower level manager or higher level supervisor. So there's usually at least one and typically 2 or 3 ranks below him or her, and then very often 1 or 2 or 3 ranks above them. So they're very much in the middle of the chain of command. That said, in a small community, you could have a lieutenant who answers directly to the chief. You could have a lieutenant who only supervises 1 or a handful of people. In a larger agency, a lieutenant might have a span of control that involved dozens of people, sergeants, corporals, deputies, and other line personnel. So it's really hard to say without knowing the size of the department. But broadly, a lieutenant is kind of right in the middle of the command structure. And
then when it comes to interviewing Jessica Quintana, because if what's been reported is true, that there was NyQuil, potentially vodka involved, she, at the time that deputies arrived, she was still in the water and she needed help breathing. She couldn't breathe on her own for a while. She was airlifted to a hospital. She's in critical condition. Apparently now she's breathing on her own. At what point can law enforcement actually speak with her and know that she's in a state where if she says something that could be incriminating, that could actually be used in court?
There's no legal time frame that's required. Typically, when somebody has been through a traumatic event, and regardless of her involvement, I think we could all say that whatever happened and whoever caused it to happen, this was a traumatic event for Jessica Quintana as well as for her children. Typically, the science is that a person needs 48 hours to sleep cycles to kind of get their prefrontal cortex back online, to integrate memory in a way that is reliable. And so that clock is already told in this case, as I understand it. And I think it would be very wise, if it hasn't happened already, for the investigators to be speaking to Jessica as soon as possible, assuming she is physically able to do so and assuming there's no cognitive damage from the near drowning.
And just lastly, because this story, and if all is alleged, that's been alleged is true, I mean, what a traumatic and sad experience for these kids, for this wife, I think of, if Domingo Quintana is telling the truth with this phone call, and for him to become the center of this story, I'm sure that that's not something that he would have wanted either. But just reading kind of what's been reported, and I know you've probably in your career have covered some, using police's terms in this one, like bizarre cases. Just what was your kind of gut in reading, just your reaction to reading how this story's played out thus far?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, at this stage of the investigation, the investigative team should be considering multiple scenarios, and they need to be holding multiple possibilities in their head at the same time and running those scenarios down kind of without fear or favor, as objectively and thoroughly as possible, and figuring out just where the facts lead, because there's a lot of different possibilities here. I mean, one is that Domingo attempted to take the life of his family, thought maybe he was successful in doing so, and staged the 911 call to cast blame on his wife. The other possibility is that Jessica indeed intended to take the lives of her children and maybe out of remorse tried to take her own once she did what she thought she needed to do. So both of those possibilities in my mind are equally likely, and you need to be kind of following the facts as objectively and thoroughly in both directions. And then the additional question is, what the heck is this sheriff's lieutenant doing, inserting himself in the midst of this thing and having what looks like a highly inappropriate contact with somebody that he has a personal relationship with? That's extremely damaging to this investigation, and I think it's very wise that this is now being handed over to an agency that is entirely removed from that perceived conflict of interest.
Yeah, it's just bizarre, and I think that's the thing with this story is it's like each time that the story develops, and in this case it was hey, this lieutenant went to go visit him, and we don't really know why. It's just it's another question where you're like, what? So we'll see how this plays out. Matt Irvine, it's been great speaking with you. Thank you for your expertise on this. We appreciate it here at Law and Crime.
Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate you having me on.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.